start to join before we get started. So as people are coming in the room, I'll just cover a couple of housekeeping items for today's session. For everyone joining us live, thank you so much. You will all be getting a recording of today's webinar in your inbox soon, so don't worry about jotting it all down in real time. And second, we will have our Q&A period at the end of the webinar. So feel free to use that Q&A box throughout the webinar. And then at the end, we're going to answer them in the order that they come in. And finally, you can use the chat box as well throughout the webinar. If you have any comments or things you want to add, as Brian is talking about composable architecture, feel free to do so. Just make sure you go ahead and message it to everyone versus just host and panelists when you're sending a message in the chat box. If you want to go ahead and test that out, you can introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining from or something like that. Would love to see who's in the room today. And with that, we will get started. So welcome again, everyone, to today's Form 1 webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about demystifying composable architecture. Brian's going to walk you through what composable architecture is and how it can unlock efficiency and agility in your organization. Today's webinar is hosted by Forum 1. So in case you're not familiar with us, we are a digital agency that amplifies the impact of mission-driven organization through transformational digital solutions. Impact has been woven into our company's DNA since 1996. And as we celebrate over 26 years of turning ideas into impact with so many of our clients and partners, we look forward to the opportunity to connect with you further on how to expand your organization's impact. In terms of organizations we're working with today, here is a good overview of some of the organizations we work with, including nonprofits, associations, foundations, cultural institutions, and government agencies, to name a few. We partner with these organizations to understand their challenges and implement effective solutions that have an impact, many of which we've worked with for over 10 years. So we love working with clients for long periods of time. So if you'd like to learn more about us and some of the work we do with the organizations you see on the screen, you can check us out at forum1.com. And with that, let's move to some introductions. My name is Cassandra Swinson, and I'm the Senior Marketing Specialist here at Forum 1. I've been with Forum 1 for over 8 years now, and I love that I'm always learning from our experts, especially as technology is constantly changing at such a rapid pace. And joining me today is Brian Graves. He's our VP of Engineering, and he's been with us for over 2 years now and leads the technical service team in delivering high quality, innovative, and impact-driven work. And with that, there's Brian on screen. I'm going to turn it over to Brian to get us started.
Yeah, thanks, Cass, and welcome everybody to Demystifying Composable Architecture. As Cass mentioned, I am Brian Graves, VP of Engineering here at Forum 1. And just a little bit about me, I've got over 15 years of experience in the technology and consulting space. I spent most of that time at a few different agencies working in the commercial sector, where I've helped a number of brands successfully launch composable and headless architectures. I've been at Forum 1 and working in the NGO space and gov space, like mentioned, for the last 2 years, as of this month, so as of a couple of days ago, actually. And it's been wonderful being able to bring a lot of the learnings and approaches from the commercial space and be able to apply them to the NGO and gov sectors and really provide some good, lasting, true impact there. And certainly excited to be doing the same for our topic today, which is composable architecture. And this won't necessarily be a deep dive how-to session, but more of a discussion of what composable architecture is and why you would go with this type of solution. So today I'll go through a bit of technical explanation and then pull in some helpful analogies to hopefully better explain the concept and help everyone get a grasp on how taking a composable approach can apply to your own tech stack. And then after that, we'll talk through some of the benefits we've seen from working in composable stacks with our own clients. So looking at why you would take this approach in the first place, as opposed to going with a more traditional CMS architecture. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some thoughts on how everyone can take steps to start moving in this direction if you haven't begun doing so already. And then we'll open it up to some Q&A. But first, before we jump in here, I want to start out with a poll. So a question being, just to get a sense of where everyone's at, how familiar is everybody with composable architecture? So are you an expert? You've been working with composable architecture for a while now? Have you dove in and read a little bit about it, know some about it, but haven't been doing it day in and day out? Have you heard of it but don't know much beyond the name, or have you never heard of it? So I'll give everyone a few seconds here to fill out the poll and see where everyone's where everyone is at in their background on the subject. Getting some answers here. Cool. So it looks like somewhat of a mix. No one has claimed to be an expert, but certainly about 30% of people know some about it. 40% have heard of it, and then for 30% of you, it sounds like this will be all net new information. So for those of you, I think I think most people, I think this will be really helpful today. Hopefully, today we'll fill in some of those gaps and explain what composable is and some of the benefits. So jumping in, why are we talking about composable architecture today? Why is this an important concept for people to be aware of? And there are really a few reasons for that. The first being kind of what we've seen over the last handful of years when it comes to the expansion of engagement channels and also the overall number of devices that people are using to access and interact with content. That number has exploded over the last handful of years. So you've got the web channel that's been around forever. Obviously, you've got potentially a mobile app in place. You've got channels like social and email that you have to keep an eye on. And then you've got new technologies like the Apple Vision Pro and spatial computing. And something we're seeing a lot of in the, particularly in the museum space, is the potential for more highly immersive experiences and augmented experiences that we worked on with clients. And then, of course, of late, you have the growth of AI interfaces that change the game for what it means to interact with everyone's content as well. So given all of that, a lot of leading edge organizations out there have really started to think about how they can move beyond kind of a page-based mental model for delivering content, and how they can put in place solutions that can deliver really seamless content to a number of different devices and channels. And then separate from the growth of channels and devices on the other end, what started to happen is that people are starting to find that a lot of times the all-in-one digital experience platform approach, where everything was baked into a central CMS, was leading to unnecessary complexity. So poor experiences managing content and high costs to maintain features that frankly didn't work the best, or that organizations simply weren't using. And a lot of that has led to a general shift in how people are buying and using software and software services. So from buying software suites to really moving more towards buying software in stacks. So the concept of buying single purpose solutions only when you need them, as opposed to an all-in-one suite. And the concept of composable architecture has been, in a lot of ways, a response to these broader shifts in both how users interact with organizations and how organizations are interacting with and buying technology and technology services. And the concept of composable really started to gain steam around 2020, really from the outgrowth of headless website solutions, which was the kickoff point for a lot of the stuff that led to the composable approach. And this is around the same time that we started to see a lot of the enterprise platforms such as Acquia and Sitecore start to make moves in this direction, breaking apart their DXP stacks and doing things like acquiring separate CDP solutions, creating pure content delivery and hybrid CMS solutions, and really just having other single purpose solutions available where you could use only what you needed and didn't have to take everything all at once. And around this time, a lot of this was also driven by the fact that we started to see quick growth of single purpose SaaS-based content services. So Contentful, Sanity, Content Stack, Strappy on the open source side, that did one thing and one thing well: manage and deliver content to headless front ends. And the result of all of this is really that composable architecture has essentially become the stack of this decade, the 2020s. So whereas in the early 2000s, we really got the first dynamic content management systems that allowed for easy web-based publishing that wasn't easy to do or possible to do before without being able to go in depth in HTML and all of that. We got that first in the 2000s. And then really in the 2010s is when we saw those CMSs grow into more fully featured all-in-one platforms that most people are accustomed to. So everything is built into the CMS as a central hub. And then really, like I said, this decade is where we've seen a lot of those monolithic platforms begin to break apart and really driven by the growth of a lot of the single purpose solutions. So instead of having a single platform that tried to do everything, but ended up all the times doing certain things poorly, you could now lean into various single purpose services and really get a best in class solution for your specific needs by tying those services together. So that's a little bit on kind of where we've been, how we've gotten to the point we're at, and what we've been seeing grow in momentum for the last few years. But where are we today? How would we define composable architecture in 2024? And at a high level, how I like to explain it is it's a technology framework that uses modular cloud-based components that can scale up or down with your needs, and where individual components can be assembled to create custom apps in an efficient way. And by components, I'm really referring to the technical services needed to build a digital product of some kind. So what you need to build a website or an app or whatever it happens to be that you're building in a digital space. So that could be the front end of your app or site, the content management component, the infrastructure. You may or may not have personalization, search, and things of that nature at play here as well. And really just composable architecture really just means that all of those individual services are self-contained, talk to each other through APIs, are cloud-based in some way, and not coupled together in a way where they can't easily be swapped out. And I'm going to dive into more detail and jump into a few analogies to hopefully help better explain this here in a second and what it looks like in practice. But first, wanted to just dive into a little bit of when we've seen it be beneficial for organizations to take a composable approach. And the questions often we get asked is a composable approach only for very complex technical ecosystems, or is it better suited for low complexity needs, standing up a basic microsite, for instance? And what we found is that it's really a fit for both ends of the spectrum. If you're a large enterprise organization with a ton of users interacting across a lot of channels and devices, like I mentioned earlier, really taking a step back from a pays-based approach and thinking about your content in a more holistic way, potentially moving personalization to a different part of your stack. All those can be hugely beneficial to delivering across all those channels and devices. But on the other end, that microsite example, taking a scaled down approach and not standing up an all-in-one CMS that may have more there than you really need, we've really found can be a huge win as well when it comes to speed and agility and standing up a simple website. So really, what we found is it can be a good fit on both ends of the spectrum. And the other two areas where we've seen it be highly applicable, especially in the NGO space, are when you have data-rich applications or the need for more immersive experiences. So we found the ability to move away from highly coupled content management systems can really empower you to better leverage modern front-end frameworks for data visualization or tie into augmented reality solutions like we've done for clients and really drive a better overall experience in those two use cases. So just a couple of really key use cases where we found it to be really beneficial, but again, composable works for simple content management and website needs as well. So if those aren't your use cases, still applicable here. And just wanted to take a moment as an aside here, because a question we also often get asked is composable architecture synonymous with headless? And I've already said the word headless multiple times in this webinar, so understandable point of confusion, but the answer is really no, it's not. They aren't strictly the same thing. While a headless architecture certainly can enable a composable approach, composable takes things a step further than simply headless. So instead of just having your backend website separated from the front end, the entire system is typically made up of separate modular components that can be changed out or replaced. So for instance, in a typical headless setup, you might see what's on the left here, where your front end lives in its own infrastructure and might be a JavaScript framework like Next.js, for example, with the underlying CMS separated and still connected to the front end via an API, but still acting as kind of that main hub for things like identity management, forms, search, etc. As opposed to that, in a composable stack, all of those pieces may live separately and interact with different parts of the system. Now, these two, what you see on screen here, are just examples and not necessarily exactly what a specific architecture would look like. These exact pieces of functionality may or may not exist in your particular architecture, or may or maybe more or less coupled or decoupled in reality, but more just for illustrative purposes to visualize what the difference between headless of just separating the front and the back end and a fully composable solution may look like. So diving a little bit deeper here, there are 4 key principles to having a composable stack. And those principles are microservices, API first solution, cloud native, and headless. And this is also known by the acronym MACH. And MACH was really coined by the MACH Alliance, which is a nonprofit advocacy group that advocates for composable stacks, essentially. And these 4 principles are what enable and underpin a typical composable stack. So you have microservices, which are a way of designing software where each service is focused on doing one thing well and being able to operate independently of other services. So you can think about it like having a bunch of specialized shops that sell different types of food, as opposed to the alternative, which would be a giant supermarket. And microservices really just allow for the choice of best-in-class services. So you may choose one thing to manage your content and another for personalization, as opposed to having those things be bundled together. On the API first side, what that really means is designing applications in a way that lets them easily talk and connect with other software through a universal language. So you can kind of think of it like the recent standardization around USB-C, where now we have a universal charger that can work with all devices. So iPhone, Android, MacBooks, whatever. In the same way that we now have a universal charger standard, designing with APIs and focusing on an API first approach really just ensures that all parts of your stack can communicate easily, even if they may live in different places. Cloud native, really just a way of building and running applications that fully take advantage of the cloud computing model. So it means the software is designed to be flexible, scalable, can grow bigger or smaller as needed. It's resilient, so it can handle problems without crashing. All of that due to really being hosted in the cloud first way and using cloud-based services where possible. And the cloud paradigms we typically see in Composable are that of PaaS-based solutions and development environments, or SaaS-based cloud applications and services. And then lastly, headless, we already talked about this a little bit, but it's a setup that allows for changing how the application looks or interacts with users without really altering the core backend functions, because we've essentially separated those 2 things and decoupled them from each other. So those are the 4 main principles of really designing composable software. And I do want to note the MACH Alliance themselves try not to be too dogmatic towards these principles. So the way they typically stated is that while every software vendor, so those people building the underlying CMS or the CDP solution or other platforms that really enable composable architecture, they say that those solutions should fairly strictly follow these principles for purposes of interoperability. The people building the actual websites and applications on top of that software can really follow more of a model of picking and choosing what makes sense for them. And that's really the approach we recommend as well. So it's important to be it's more important in our minds to be navigating towards alignment with these principles than to strictly say you have to follow every single one of these with your tech stack today. So, for example, if you've got WordPress in place and enjoy the editing experience of that, you don't need to completely ditch that to move to a SaaS-based content-only solution just because WordPress does other things out of the box as well. So you can still keep that in place and really start moving towards and getting some of the benefits out of a composable architecture. And we have ways to move in a headless direction there to stand up a powerful cloud-based services alongside that, for example, or really just picking and choosing what makes sense for you is the important piece of this. What makes sense for your organization and the solution you're trying to build to get the most benefit from the approach. So that was all highly technical, but let's break this down a bit. What's a good way to think about these 4 principles of composable architecture and how they might apply to your needs? And really the best analogy we've found is that of Lego blocks. So thinking through this analogy, imagining you have a huge box of Lego bricks. And in the case of this analogy, each Lego brick represents a piece of software, and that piece of software could be anything. So it could be a front-end app or a way to manage your content in a very straightforward example. So like Lego bricks, these modular pieces of software form the building blocks of what you're looking to build. So they're small, self-contained, independent, microservices, much like Lego bricks are small, self-contained things that do one thing. And because these pieces of software are modular and self-contained, they become easy to change out. Now, easy is relative here, and easy doesn't mean no effort involved by any means, but it does become much easier, say, to move from one CMS to another in a composable model. When the templates and pages aren't linked to the CMS, and instead the front end and the CMS talk to each other via API, there's less entanglement there. And as long as you're following an API contract and have appropriate content modeling in place, you can swap out that CMS in a much more straightforward way, because the software is designed to be easily changed out, added to, remove parts from, without breaking anything else due to the self-contained nature of the services. So in our example here, if we wanted to swap out the original CMS for an alternate one, say we were moving from a Drupal to Contentful, just as an example of where we've actually done this in the real world for clients, you can now do so with much more relative ease, and really eliminating any kind of vendor lock-in that you may have experienced in the past, as well as being able to do so and make that change without having to totally rebuild the front end of your website. The other way to think about this is that you can easily mix and match different services. So taking identity management as an example, outside of just the front end of the CMS. So identity management being things like user registration, authentication, et cetera. So you could go with what your CMS offers there, but that doesn't always provide the features and functionality you need, or the best, most performant approach. So similar to how different Lego bricks still work together, even if they're a different size, shape, or color, with composable architecture, different services can be matched together. So instead of relying on your CMS's capabilities there, you may opt to go with a separate cloud-based solution for identity management, such as Cognito, just as an example, that AWS provides, that really allows you to get the exact functionality you need in a really seamless way. And tied closely to that, you can do all of that because the services are built to play well together. So in composable architecture, each piece of software is really designed to connect and communicate with other pieces easily. And so this means you can build complex systems by combining simple single purpose ones. So similar to turning a bunch of small bricks into a giant Lego city, because you can snap them all together. Only in composable, that ability to communicate is via API. And that's what really empowers this ability for all the different services to play well together. And then finally, what composable architecture really empowers you to build only what you want or need. So sometimes, obviously, with Legos or with your tech stack, you need a rocket ship, but other times you might just need a tugboat to accomplish your goals. And with traditional monolithic solutions, a lot of times you always get the rocket ship, and the overhead and increased in total cost of ownership that comes with maintaining features you may not necessarily need. Or alternatively, if you build the tugboat today and then you need to change and evolve over time, you become constrained by what you have built and your lack of ability to scale. So with composable architecture, one of the key main things about it is it allows you to scale up or down and really add new services or improve existing ones to make your website or application do more things or do them better. Really just making it much more flexible than traditional approaches. So hopefully that gives everyone a little bit better understanding of kind of the concept of composable architecture, what it is. But question being, like, why would you go this route? And can walk through some specific examples here where we've done this for clients, and what advantages we've found of composable over a more traditional approach of thinking of the CMS as that kind of digital hub driving with all the functionality tightly coupled together. So let's talk through some of those benefits. And really, for starters, taking a composable approach can make you more nimble and efficient. So by leveraging self-contained technologies, we can significantly reduce development time and costs. So as an example, we're currently working on engagement with our client at the Smithsonian. And as part of that, we're working within a composable stack that includes Contentful for content management and a headless front end on Next.js, among a few other things and technologies involved. in a composable way. And as part of that work, one of our principal engineers, Aaron Zink, noted how much more nimble the team can be in development, how much less risk there is because there's no risk of breaking the content editing experience or corrupting a database because of the tech stack and the composable approach, because everything is being developed as more as microservices and in that self-contained approach. And really the key benefit of that is because of that approach, our team has been able to focus more on merging and testing new features and is able to do it much quicker than in a more traditional stack. And really, we found that to be true in general across a number of composable engagements. So as we focus more on headless microservice-based solutions, we've been able to direct more time at delivering quality features for users and less time debugging and managing the complexities of overly coupled systems. So really, just taking a composable approach has resulted in being able to be much more efficient with our development time. The second thing we found is that a composable stack can make you much more agile. So because you can easily swap out components and services, it makes it easier than ever to quickly adapt to changing needs, be that changing user needs, changes in the marketplace, regulatory changes, wherever it may happen to be that's driving a need for change in your software stack. So you can do things like swap out the CMS, like I mentioned or more easily migrate your infrastructure or move to a new front-end framework without one thing being dependent on the other. And this approach is one we've been taking for City Health Dashboard, which is a project we designed and developed with the NYU Langone Health Department of Population Health. And City Health Dashboard is essentially a really powerful tool to be able to analyze health data for America's cities, with the goal being to build healthier and more equitable communities. So really important mission and goal of this project. We've been working on it with them for quite a while. And over the past year, we've been working to modernize and update the tech stack behind the site. And because the site was initially headless, that made it all the easier to move towards a more fully composable architecture and to do it one piece at a time. So we didn't go in and overhaul everything at once. In fact, this is something that's still work in progress. But first, we did migrate the front end to Next.js, and then at a later stage, we swapped out a dated Drupal instance for Contentful that would have had to been upgraded anyway. But because of the needs, we chose to change the backend content management there. And currently, without the need to host a backend CMS going forward, we're evaluating options for serverless architecture for the front end, or serverless infrastructure and architecture for the front end, as well as serverless Postgres solutions for a database that's in place tied to Carto for the mapping functionality. And really, the result here has been a modern overhaul of technology, a much more performant site, and a lower total cost of ownership than the previous tech stack that was in place. And keeping things up to date and scaling up or down needs will be even more straightforward in the future because of the changes we've made and are still in progress of making. So a good example here of how you can be more agile if you're taking a composable approach and changing out pieces as you have time and budget, as opposed to having to rewrite everything from scratch if you want to make a change in one part of your stack. Another major benefit of composable architecture that we found is the ability to scale up or down your solution as needed. So whereas in the past with kind of an all-in-one CMS solution, you got a lot of functionality you may not have needed. And that also came with the additional burden to maintain those systems. Instead, with a composable approach, you can bring in only what you need and scale up or down your solution as you see fit. So Forum One recently launched Becoming Visible with our client, the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum. And Becoming Visible is a digital exhibition, and as such, it needed to be highly interactive and immersive on the front end, but didn't have much in the way of integrations or technical needs on the back end. So the original plan was to launch the exhibition as a more traditional Drupal build on AWS, which is Smithsonian's typical tech stack. But due to the rather limited technical needs on the back end and the kind of more interactive and immersive needs on the front end, we opted to really scale down the tech stack and remove the need for Drupal and focus our efforts on a Next.js experience and utilized Vercel for the infrastructure, Vercel Blob for some of the media approaches there, And this really just allowed us to focus time and effort on the interactive nature of the exhibition itself and to launch quickly. So um, this was done in essentially 6 months, which is unheard of for launching a digital exhibition like this. And it was done with limited overhead and cost over time. And the result was really an amazing digital exhibition delivered in time for Women's History Month, and that we have built and prepped to be able to scale and add new services to over time to grow this over time. But launching a high quality experience quickly was kind of the primary initial need. So that's the approach we took, and it worked out very well and has been very successful. So again, one of the key benefits of composable architecture is that ability to scale up or down quickly and easily. You can start small and be prepped to grow your capabilities, the capabilities of your site or app over time. And sticking with the becoming visible example for a moment, as I mentioned, the nature of it being a digital exhibition meant that it needed to be that really high-end experience. And one of the major benefits of composable architecture is that you can use modern best-in-class technology. So and ensure you're really delivering the highest quality website or application to your users. So by utilizing front-end frameworks like Next.js, you can give a website a more app-like feel, implement things like page transitions and other app-like features. And this can just be really powerful in providing the highest quality experience, like I said. It also means, from a high quality standpoint, it means you can drastically improve performance. So when you can statically generate content and don't have the burden of hitting the backend as often, you can really improve front end performance. And we typically see that when we look at Google's Core Web Vitals performance metrics for these sites. It improves substantially when we're able to deliver a composable experience that properly takes advantage of a lot of the modern front end framework techniques that are now available. And then lastly, security. So a major benefit of a fully composable solution is that it's more secure. So being able to use cloud native components and services that are hosted on platforms that offer automatic updates, including security patching, really just means that the underlying infrastructure of your application can stay up to date with the latest security measures without a lot of manual intervention. And it also means a reduced attack surface a lot of times. So by decoupling the back end from the front end, headless systems have fewer entry points to exploit, and making them just all that much more secure. There are still needs to secure pieces of it, the API endpoints, the applications, and the backend systems themselves, but it can be done in a much improved way. So all in all, a lot of benefits when it comes to delivering the highest quality possible solutions. And then lastly, being able to choose best-in-class tech is certainly a major benefit of composable architecture. And I mentioned this one a couple of times already, but this is really just a broader trend in the market that we're seeing overall, like I said. So a lot of times you'll see this referenced, like I said earlier, as choosing stacks over suites. But essentially, it's just the concept of assembling best-in-class single-purpose solutions and then having a team that can integrate those in the best possible way. And composable architecture really enables this approach in the front of the house type work. So you can have a content as a service solution handling your content layer, a separate CDP handling personalization, for instance, across channels, a data layer in AWS if you want, tied to an orchestration layer of some kind to pull it all together and deliver the best experience to your users. So run through some of the benefits. Hopefully this info has piqued people's interest a little bit, and really then the question becomes, well, how do you start to move in this direction? So I want to close out with a few thoughts on how composable impacts teams and tech stacks, and things to think about if you're looking to move in this direction. And this is going to by no means be a how-to on composable, but more just some broad strokes and things to think about, and things where we've seen when working in this stack and working with clients in this stack. And the big thing I think we've seen the most is how a shift like this impacts team skill sets and those tech stacks. On the team skill set front, the big thing we've seen is that this model shifts the balance from really the CMS is the central place of knowledge needed for teams to a need for increased knowledge around the various tools and language needed to build the applications on one end. So JavaScript React is kind of what you see a lot of times there today. And then on the other end, it's really the skill set to design and develop those robust APIs and have the knowledge to bring all the systems together. And in a way, the knowledge set needed becomes more pure and less platform dependent. It's more around being able to pull those platforms together. What we've also seen is that it shifts where the complexity lives within your tech stack. So security, data manipulation, and other things that used to be all centralized within a CMS, a lot of times are now more dispersed or move up the stack towards the front end and API layer. So ensuring those skill sets are in the right place is key as well. But lastly, though, I did want to mention that, like I mentioned before, this doesn't have to be a flip the switch overnight transition. We don't typically, unless the organizations we're working with are already prepared and in a place to do that, we don't necessarily recommend a flip the switch type approach. It's more how can we do this over time? How can we move this one piece at a time, move in this direction, and get your organization's tech stack in the best place for future state, and ensuring that you have the right skills, knowledge, and partners in place to ensure you can be successful. And transition like this is really key to making that move. So again, transition over time is kind of what we recommend, but starting moving in this direction in a lot of cases where it makes sense. So some final thoughts to wrap up and recap here. Composable architecture is a flexible technology framework that really scales and evolves with your needs through cloud-based modular and headless components. And it's really a move away from a centralized, highly coupled CMS at the center type approach. And the move from a more traditional approach towards a composable architecture does require that shift in mental models, and some new team skill sets and tech stack changes are likely to be needed if you choose to make the move. So definitely recommend making sure you've got that in place again, just to make sure you can be successful moving forward in this. But we have seen time and again how going this direction can provide a ton of benefits, and really looking at things like how efficient we can be in development, how agile we can be with getting new features and functionality in place, and really just the ability to create the highest quality experiences for our clients and ultimately their users. We've seen a ton of success with this approach, and it makes sense in a lot of cases. So with that, we will open it up to questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. That was such great information, and I know everyone got a lot out of it. So we are going to move into our Q&A period. We have a few questions that have come in. So Brian, I'm going to just shoot them your way. All right. First one is API the only way to connect the Lego bricks? We're looking at integrating a microservice through iframes. Is it advisable?
Yeah, I think this goes back a little bit to what I mentioned around trying not to be like too dogmatic. I think in a vacuum, API is certainly like the approach we would recommend and the best course of action. But I don't know the full details around what microservice you're looking at or kind of details there. But there are certainly cases where you may have to go another direction for one reason or another. Iframes have their challenges, so I would be hesitant to say yes, great direction to go, but again, I don't know the full details to fully give you a good answer on that. It may depend on what exactly we're talking about there, but I think answer being API is ultimately the best approach, but if there are specific needs that can't take that direction, then there are certainly other options there, and it doesn't have to be API or nothing.
Great. I hope that answered your question. The next one is, what does the content editing experience look like in composable architecture? And do you lose the ability to do things like Gutenberg, style block, or visual editing?
Yeah, so got that question quite a bit. And really the ability to do kind of that visual or page builder editing like that was certainly a constraint historically with headless and composable setups. But more recently, what we've seen specifically in WordPress, since that was kind of called out here, on the WordPress end, there are things like Faust out there that have sprung up that allow you to maintain block editing capabilities and that type of content editing experience while going in the headless or composable direction. On the Drupal end, as well, we've looked into and used things like Next.js for Drupal. There's a module there that lets you maintain some of that functionality as well and get that headless approach. On the Contentful side, they've now got things like Contentful Studio that allow for much the same approach. Sitecore has had solutions out there for a few years that allow this kind of thing. So really, whether you're talking kind of enterprise level open source or kind of the single purpose content solutions versus the more full featured CMSs, there are now solutions and options out there that really give you more of that high end content experience that a lot of people are used to and similar to what they're used to, while still going in the composable direction. I'd say the only other thing I've said is I know specifically we've had clients in one of the cases I talked to a little bit ago where non-technical individuals that have loved the move from a more all-in-one CMS that they found to be overly complex and difficult to use to we moved them to Contentful, a more single-purpose solution, and they have loved that just because at the end of the day it's much complex for what they're doing and much simpler and easier to use.
Great. And our next question says, you've mentioned a lot of SaaS-based content management systems. How would you go about this approach while staying open source where possible?
Yep. And we work a ton with open source platforms like Drupal or WordPress. And like I mentioned, we tried not to say it has to be fully SaaS based or anything like that. So you can certainly use those in certain situations where it makes sense. The Drupal and the WordPress, we do that all the time. But if you want to go, if you're talking more in the kind of that pure content as a service model, that there are options out there to stay open source. We found Strappy's, I think, kind of the big one we've seen out there that is a good option there. And Strappy has both a cloud-based service as well as being able to host it yourself. There's obviously a lot of considerations when deciding whether to go open source or not, but having that cloud-based option available, we found to be a big win in efficiency. That's on the CMS side. There are plenty of other things we could talk through there, but I would say Strappy, I think, on that pure kind of headless content as a service model is the open source one I would recommend if you're trying to stay in that single purpose lane.
Thank you. And everyone, we have plenty of time. We have 2 more questions, unless anyone else has other questions to drop in there. We'll just finish up with these 2. And then we will be done for today. So what are some other things you might include in a composable solution beyond just the front end and content management?
So yeah, so I mentioned a couple already, but so things like identity management I mentioned, and we often see that spun up separately in more complex apps. Personalization solutions that work across channels, serverless database solutions. We've done separate Redis services and caching solutions. A/B testing and optimization is one that's out there a lot. Search is a big one, so running Elasticsearch or Algolia is one that's really grown a lot of momentum over the past few years of running search as its own service. Really, basically anything you might include in an app that can be deployed as a anything you would include in an app can be deployed in most cases as a microservice. So.
Great. Okay, this is our last question. Going once, going twice. If anyone else has any other questions, you have Brian's attention now. You can ask him anything about composable architecture. Okay, so final question is, are there times when you wouldn't recommend composable architecture?
Certainly. I'm a big component of composable architecture, but it's not the only approach we take or that we ever recommend to our clients. We still go down a more traditional path with clients for certain reasons. I think there are a few different reasons why we would do that. One, there are some use cases where it may not make the most sense. So, well, I did mention you can certainly take a scaled down approach and release things pretty quickly with Composable. There are certainly also some advantages to just going all in on WordPress for certain reasons, or if you have a less complex site where you need, but you can, or you can take advantage of plugins that are out there and themes that are out there, and leaning in on what you get out of the box and what you can get from the ecosystem. So depending on the exact case, we may recommend one direction or another, but it's not always going to be composable. There are some use cases out there for the all-in-one still. The other case we run into with a lot of these systems is FedRAMP requirements. So if that's a case where I'd love to see some of these newer tools and services become FedRAMP certified, but most of them just frankly aren't there yet. If you're talking about like your contentfuls and things of that nature, that we just can't use them in a lot of cases. So I'd love to see movement there, but that's certainly one another case I see. And then last, as I mentioned, you've got to have the team that's able to support the type of solution. So either in-house or through an agency you're partnering with of some kind. It's a different approach with different skill sets and knowledge required. And the shift isn't by any means insurmountable, but I do always want to take into account when we're recommending a technology solution to our clients, what their ability to support it going forward is, and don't want to recommend something that's not going to be feasible for them to support. So always take that in consideration too when we would recommend going with Composable or not.
Awesome. Well, that looks like those are all the questions we got today, Brian. So everyone, we're gonna wrap up a little bit early. No one's gonna be upset about that. Thank you again for everyone who attended live. Again, you'll have this recording in your inbox soon. And we appreciate you, Brian. Thank you for all of this. And we'll see you all later.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.